Hey Student Success, welcome to your lecture video for Chapter 9. So Chapter 9 talks about the social world of college. Up until this point, most of the conversations, not all, but a good chunk of them have revolved around kind of like the academics, the career component. This is going to really focus on all those other things that we have going on socially, culturally, kind of the changing dynamics that we might have to deal with as a college student. And so it starts off, as always, kind of just taking a self-inventory and then some goals that you might have, as well as the objectives of the chapter. So we jump into saying basically like college life and social life is hard sometimes to deal with and balance. And there's a lot of components that go along with that. The first thing it brings up is getting along with other people, which I know sounds simple, but we know that not everyone is easy to get along with. And so the textbook talks a little bit about interdependence and how sometimes we do have to depend on other people for our jobs, for class projects, for social responsibilities, whatever it might be. And so just making sure that we are interacting with people in a way that's going to be productive, but also valuing that social interaction. I know I have a lot of students in my face-to-face classes who are not big fans of working with others or even interacting with other people. And, to a certain degree, that's okay. We are all different. We have all different backgrounds and interests. However, unless you're going into a field where you literally will not have to interact with another person, then you're going to have to build those kind of relationships and interactions. And so this does talk about making new friends, again, which I know might sound odd depending on where you are in your life, but it can be difficult as an adult to make new friends, and college is a great time, excuse me, to be able to do that. And so this just kind of gives some tips on how to kind of create those relationships with your peers in particular, and then what to do about if you're not very outgoing. Socially, I am kind of an introvert, whereas professionally, I'm an extrovert. And so I do have to balance that sometimes and figure out what approach I'm going to take in what situations. It goes into communication skills, which we talked about communication already, professional communication. But then communication also plays a role, obviously, in interacting with people, both that you are not familiar with as well as people who are in your friend circle. And so this will go through the importance of knowing about nonverbal communication, how are we communicating how we feel based on our facial expressions, our body language. So making sure that we're aware of all those things as well. And these are active listening tips that we've gone over in previous chapters. Talk less to listen more, not just wait to talk, actually listen, ask questions, watch the body language, watch how people are reacting to what you're saying, respond in a way that lets them know that you're listening, and get feedback from that other person. Here are some other effective speaking tips, being honest, look for common ground, try to relate to people while not trying to copy them. This goes into talking about assertive communication versus passive or aggressive. It means being honest and direct, but not being rude or just kind of backing out of the conversation. This section here talks about online social networking, which has to do obviously with interacting. So social networking could be sites I know it's kind of cracks me up a little bit. They still use MySpace in here. So using an online social networking is helpful, but then there are more professional networking sites as well, like LinkedIn. And so knowing maybe how to use those to your advantage, you're probably not going to network on some social media sites unless I always give the example of unless you're a photographer and you use Instagram or something to show off your portfolio of pictures, so there are ways to use those type of sites for networking purposes. But this goes through kind of some benefits of using, they focus on Facebook, but you could apply this to a lot of other social media sites, and you could probably apply it to TikTok and things like that. So just some benefits to using it, but also maybe trying to kind of integrate it into your networking in general. This section talks about balancing schoolwork and social life, which is really tricky. It's hard to be able to go to class, have a job, have family responsibilities, and then also maintain a social life. So this is going to kind of link back to a lot of the chapter content we already talked about, time management. a lot of things come back to time management, right? Like it's really going to hinge upon that. How well do you manage your time? And that's going to be important for, academics, social. Work on your study skills. So balance your time. Sometimes we have to say no, though. Sometimes we have to make school a priority or find a way to kind of fit it all in. It's hard to tell people no, and some people don't understand that school is a priority at the time, but making sure that you're still working on your study skills while you're trying to maintain those friendships, keeping your social life from affecting your studying, and then reach out if you need help. Reach out to tutoring or talk to a trusted. When I went to Kent State, we called these critical peers. It's people who in the PhD program could kind of understand what you were going through. And so there was a group of 4 of us who we would like email back and forth, or we would meet before or after class, because sometimes people in your like social life may not understand what's going on with you academically. And so having people on campus could be helpful. This little section talks a little bit about Greek life. Stark State does not have Greek life, but if you transfer to a 4-year institution, that's a possibility that you can get involved in Greek life. This next section talks about difficulties like resolving conflicts. So if you have to deal with, they bring up like roommate examples, but this can go with anyone. Like if we have a conflict, how might we approach it to have a successful conflict resolution? And so this talks about respecting others' opinions, be open-minded. This is a big thing, I think, in general, society overall has a hard time with. Sometimes we are very set in our own opinions, and that's okay to have our own opinion, but we also want to be open-minded because we're not right about everything, or our way to see the world is not the only way to see the world. And so allowing ourselves to consider other alternatives, take deep breaths and then compromise if need be. Here's some other ways to make sure that we are resolving conflict in a productive way. Again, make sure we're listening. I don't know if you've heard this, people use I statements, and not saying you do this, but I feel this way. So it's really putting the kind of power in you. I feel this way. I do this. I believe that. And then brainstorm together to kind of find a solution. This talks about roommate issues. Again, Stark State is not a dorm, on-campus living situation. However, I think this can actually apply to anyone that you might be living with. Sometimes you might have to reevaluate how you resolve conflicts with your partner, with your children. Goodness knows, I have, a teenager and technically almost 2 preteens at this point. And I'm constantly resolving conflicts. And so I am doing these things all the time. I'm anticipating problems before they happen, for sure. I am also trying my best to deal with any problem when it happens. I'm being flexible. So some of these tips can apply, whether it's a roommate, a sibling, a loved one that you're in a relationship with, whatever it might be. These are good tips to think about. And then it goes on to maybe more deeper issues. This section talks about dealing with harassment. If you have issues on campus with harassment, whether it is, harassment's a big term. So there's lots of things that could fall under and kind of connect back to harassment. So it's like verbal, physical, psychological. So make sure that if that is an issue that you reach, we do have counseling services on campus. We have Title IX coordinators that help deal with this. Sometimes in our college years, we also have to deal with changing family relationships. Sometimes that might mean hey, you're out of the house, you still have younger siblings at home, or you might be married with children. And there's lots of things that can happen while you're in college. And so sometimes we have to deal with those family relationships. All right, this next section is going to talk about living with diversity. And again, diversity is a really big umbrella term. So I like down here we go. Here's a list, and this is not complete. This is just examples of how people can be diverse. I think sometimes we think diversity of things that we can see on the outside. Like you can often, not always, often see someone's race and ethnicity. You cannot always see their culture, their educational background, geography, those kind of things. Look at socioeconomic background, gender, age, sexual orientation. All of these. And extracurricular activities, abilities. There are so many ways we can be diverse that sometimes we pigeonhole and we think diversity is just a couple things, but it actually applies to just this big spectrum of ideas and components. And the benefits of diversity, it does prepare you while you're in college. What I really love about Stark State is we have a really diverse student population. We have students from the age of 13 all the way up to like their 60s. I had a student at 72 one year. And so it's really neat that we have just this diverse group of students. We have students who are born and raised right here in like Northeast Ohio. And then we have students who have come to us literally from all over the world because they have moved here. And so I think that's really neat, and that does prepare us for the workforce. If you haven't already been in the workforce yet, you're going to be in a very diverse workforce. We are in a global society where we have all of these different backgrounds, and we do actually learn better in that kind of setting. I have a very Americanized view of things. Obviously, like I'm from here, so that's my view of things. But when I was getting my doctoral program, one of my critical peers, he was from Bangladesh. And so when I would say things, he would be like, well, here's how we view this or think about it in, where I'm from. And it's like, wow, it really does allow you to consider ideas and perspectives and things that you may not have before. So it really broadens your horizons, and it benefits kind of your thinking as well as other people's thinking. And this goes through, again, this list of just benefits of diversity. It's probably one of the times that in college, maybe not the first, but maybe the most predominant time that people are exposed to lots of different backgrounds. It also increases your own self-awareness. This goes on to talk about like multiculturalism, as well as older non-traditional students and diversity. Because again, remember, diversity is a very broad idea. Lots of things fall under that umbrella. But also then accepting and celebrating diversity. How can we do this? This section talks about acknowledging our own diversity. How are we different from the people around us, even from our own family? Because we're all so very different. Consider if we have any stereotypes. Sometimes we have those like subconscious stereotypes. So just looking at those and how is that impacting, if it is, impacting the way that we interact with other people. This goes on to talk about like body language, how it might differ from different cultures that you may or may not be used to. I think it's really interesting, like how eye contact is really polite in America, but then in other cultures, it's not as kind of the way that you show respect. And so just being aware of those type of things. I think this one is funny. I've seen jokes about this, and like Americans clap their hands like when we're, round of applause, and some French clap to end a conversation. So just kind of like an interesting way that we view clapping. All right. Here are some other ways to make sure that we are being open to diversity, trying not to generalize, being sensitive in our communication and our interactions. Attend events that allow us to increase cultural awareness. We have a lot of workshops on campus. Some of them do focus on this exact thing, increasing cultural awareness. All right. Then we go to taking a stand against prejudice. So if you see it happening around you, trying to, talk about it with others. If you observe something, report it. If you feel like it is kind of bordering on the hateful type thing, working with student groups and celebrating. Okay, so this section goes a little bit more into dealing with prejudice, and then talking about those key takeaways. And then we start wrapping up with talking about campus groups, because again, this is another way that we're talking about interaction, diversity, relationships. And there's a lot of research that does show, and I believe I brought this up before, but there's a lot of research that does show that if we are involved on campus in some way through an organization or maybe an on-campus job, whatever it might be, that our retention is actually more likely. So that means we're more likely to keep attending and then graduate. So this does talk about all of the benefits of being involved somehow on campus. And again, maybe you don't have time for a campus club. It just might be like attending different fairs and things like that. Like we have spring fling every spring semester. We have the welcome back every fall semester. So we do have things on campus that are not necessarily student club related, but are ways to get involved. So just as a quick reminder, on the Stark State homepage under info for current students, we do have a whole list of student clubs. You can click here and you can go through, you can see all these different ways, and you can kind of click like, oh, I'm interested in math. What is the kind of overview of the math club? Who advises it? And you can email them or see when they meet. So lots of different ways to get involved on campus. Some of these will also lead to potential scholarships. If you are looking to go to a four-year institution, there are some like honor societies that allow you to apply for scholarships after you leave your institution, your two-year institution. All right. This does talk a little bit about generations, making sure that we are, again, I have a problem with this one, how to say no, like being involved or prioritizing time and activities. So this gives a little bit of tip on, when and how to say no. All right, so that is chapter 9. This will be the basis for your assignment with chapter 9. See you next time.